Today is January 7th. My name is Rob. I am an alcoholic, your friend in the lifeboat of recovery here as we journey through the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 and 12. Yesterday we journeyed through Bill's story, and we definitely saw that obviously alcohol had taken a pretty drastic and destructive turn for him. And we also saw that Bill was trying so hard through willpower alone for a while to stop drinking, and it's not working for him. And then he thought, well, maybe it's self-knowledge. Surely now that I know more about myself, I'll stop. And for him, that was still not enough. For me as well, that was still not enough. And then all of a sudden, an old school buddy of his, a guy named Ebby Thatcher, he shows up. Oh, an old drinking buddy of his, by the way. And, at first, Bill's like, oh, great. I can drink openly in front of him. But he sees this glow in his friend. And his friend says, I've got religion. And I could just imagine, of course, this is just Robology right here. I could just imagine Bill, as soon as he hears that line, going, oh no. Oh, here we go. Because he admits he bristles to religion quite a bit. You know, at least the idea of a personal God. And we're going to read that here in a minute. But he can't shake the way that his old friend is acting, and he's going to make a profound impact on Bill, as we're going to see for the remainder of this chapter. So we will be finishing Bill's story here in a minute, and we will also be reading the second page of Step 1 in the 12 Steps and 12 Traditions. That would be page 22. So with that, guys, enough of my rambling. Let's get to the book. Page 11. To Christ I conceded the certainty of a great man, not too closely followed by those who claimed him. His moral teaching most excellent. For myself, I had adopted those parts which seemed convenient and not too difficult, and the rest I disregarded. The wars which had been fought, the burnings and chicanery that religious dispute had facilitated, made me sick. I honestly doubted whether, on balance, the religions of mankind had done any good. Judging from what I had seen in Europe and since, the power of God in human affairs was negligible. The brotherhood of man, a grim jest. If there was a devil, he seemed the boss universal, and he certainly had me. But my friend sat before me, and he made the blank declaration that God had done for him what he could not do for himself. His human will had failed. Doctors had pronounced him incurable. Society was about to lock him up. Like myself, he had admitted complete defeat. Then he had, in effect, been raised from the dead, suddenly taken from the scrap heap to a level of life better than the best he had ever known. Had this power originated in him? Obviously it had not. There had been no more power in him than there was in me at that minute. And this was none at all. That floored me. It began to look as though religious people were right after all. Here was something at work in a human heart which had done the impossible. My ideas about miracles were drastically revised right then. Never mind the musty past, here sat a miracle directly across the kitchen table. He shouted great tidings. I saw that my friend was much more than inwardly reorganized. He was on a different footing. His roots grasped a new soil. Despite the living example of my friend, there remained in me the vestiges of my old prejudice. The word God still aroused a certain antipathy. When the thought was expressed there might be a God personal to me, this feeling was intensified. I didn't like the idea. I could go for such conceptions as creative intelligence, universal mind, or spirit of nature, but I resisted the thought of a czar of the heavens, however loving his sway might be. I've since talked with scores of men who felt the same way. My friend suggested what then seemed a novel idea. He said, why don't you choose your own conception of God? That statement hit me hard. It melted the icy intellectual mountain in whose shadow I had lived and had shivered many years. I stood in the sunlight at last. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Thus I was convinced that God is concerned with us humans when we want Him enough. At long last, I saw, I felt, I believed. Scales of pride and prejudice fell from my eyes. A new world came into view. The real significance of my experience in the cathedral burst upon me. For a brief moment, I had needed and wanted God. There had been a humble willingness to have Him with me, and He came. But soon, the sense of His presence had been blotted out by worldly clamors, mostly within myself. And so it had been ever since. How blind I had been. At the hospital, I was separated from alcohol for the last time. Treatment seemed wise, for I showed signs of delirium tremens. There, I humbly offered myself to God, as I then understood Him, to do with me as He would. I placed myself unreservedly under His care and direction. I admitted for the first time that of myself I was nothing, that without Him I was lost. I ruthlessly faced my sins and became willing to have my newfound friend take them away, root and branch. I have not had a drink since. My schoolmate visited me, and I fully acquainted with him my problems and deficiencies. We made a list of people that I had hurt, or toward whom I had felt resentment. I expressed my entire willingness to approach these individuals, admitting my wrong. Never was I to be critical of them. I was to right all such matters to the utmost of my ability. I was to test my thinking by the new God consciousness within. Common sense would thus become uncommon sense. I was to sit quietly when in doubt, asking only for direction and strength to meet my problems as He would have me. Never was I to pray for myself, except as my requests bore on my usefulness to others. Then only might I expect to receive. But that would be in great measure. My friend promised when these things were done, I would enter upon a new relationship with my Creator. That I would have the elements of a way of living which answered all my problems. Belief in the power of God, plus enough willingness, honesty, and humility to establish and maintain the new order of things were the essential requirements. Simple, but not easy. A price had to be paid. It meant destruction of self-centeredness. I must turn in all things to the Father of light who presides over us all. These were revolutionary and drastic proposals, but the moment I fully accepted them, the effect was electric. There was a sense of victory followed by such a peace and serenity as I had never known. There was utter confidence. I felt lifted up as though the great clean wind of a mountaintop blew through and through. God comes to most men gradually, but His impact on me was sudden and profound. For a moment I was alarmed, and I called my friend, the doctor, to ask if I were still sane. He listened in wonder as I talked. Finally, he shook his head, saying, "Something has happened to you that I don't understand, but you better hang on to it. Anything is better than the way you were." The good doctor now sees many men who have had such experiences, and he knows that they are real. While I lay in the hospital, the thought came that there was thousands of hopeless alcoholics who might be glad to have what had been so freely given to me. Perhaps I could help some of them. They in turn might work with others. My friend had emphasized the absolute necessity of demonstrating these principles in all my affairs. Particularly was it imperative to work with others as he had worked with me. Faith without works was dead, he said. And how appallingly true for the alcoholic. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. If he did not work, he would surely drink again. And if he drank, he would surely die. Then faith would be dead indeed. With us, it is just like that. My wife and I abandoned ourselves with enthusiasm to the idea of helping other alcoholics to a solution of their problems. It was fortunate, for my old business associates remained skeptical for a year and a half, during which I found little work. I was not too well at the time and was plagued by waves of self-pity and resentment. This sometimes nearly drove me back to the drink. But I soon found that when all other measures failed, work with another alcoholic would save the day. Many times I've gone to my old hospital in despair. On talking to a man there, I would be amazingly lifted up and set on my feet. It is a design for living that works in rough going. We commenced to make many fast friends, and a fellowship has grown up among us, of which it is a wonderful thing to feel a part. The joy of living we really have, even under the pressure and difficulty. I have seen hundreds of families set their feet in the path that really goes somewhere, have seen the most impossible domestic situations righted, feuds and bitterness of all sorts wiped out. I have seen men come out of asylums and resume a vital place in the lives of their families and communities. Business and professional men have regained their standing. There is scarcely any form of trouble and misery which has not been overcome among us. In one western city and its environs, there are 1,000 of us and our families. We meet frequently so that the newcomer may find the fellowship they seek. At these informal gatherings, one may often see from 50 to 200 persons. We are growing in numbers and power. An alcoholic in his cups is an unlovely creature. Our struggles with them are variously strenuous, comic, and tragic. One poor chap committed suicide in my home. He could not or would not see our way of life. There is, however, a vast amount of fun about it all. I suppose some would be shocked at our seeming worldliness and levity. But just underneath, there is deadly earnestness. Faith has to work 24 hours a day, in and through us, or we perish. Most of us feel we need to look no further for utopia. We have it with us, right here and now. Each day, my friend's simple talk in our kitchen multiplies itself in a widening circle of peace on earth and goodwill to men. Wow. There is so much in this, guys. First of all, going back to Ebby Thatcher, he was a drunk just like Bill. That's why they were drinking buddies for a long time. And it was through acts of service within the Oxford groups that helped him to become sober, one day at a time. And he brought those principles to Bill. And we see here the seeds being sown right here, just in this very first chapter of most of the steps, if not all of the steps, that Bill ends up taking. You know, I see step 2 in this chapter, 3, 4, and 5. Of course, I saw step 1 earlier. I mean, it's all over this. All right, my friends. So I'll quit rambling about the big book and we will jump into 12 and 12. We're on page 22, learning a little bit more about step 1. When first challenged to admit defeat, most of us revolted. We had approached AA expecting to be taught self-confidence. Then we'd been told that so far as alcohol is concerned, self-confidence was no good whatever. In fact, it was a total liability. Our sponsors declared that we were victims of a mental obsession so subtly powerful that no amount of human willpower could break it. There was, they said, no such thing as a personal conquest of this compulsion by the unaided will. Relentlessly deepening our dilemma, our sponsors pointed out our increasing sensitivity to alcohol. An allergy, they called it. The tyrant alcohol wielded a double-edged sword over us. First, we were smitten by an insane urge that condemned us to go on drinking. And then, by an allergy of the body that ensured that we would ultimately destroy ourselves in the process. Few indeed were those who, so assailed, had ever won through single-handed combat. It was a statistical fact that alcoholics almost never recovered on their own resources. And this had been true apparently ever since man had first crushed grapes. In AA's pioneering time, none but the most desperate cases could swallow and digest this unpalatable truth. Even these last gaspers often had difficulty in realizing how hopeless they actually were. But a few did. So guys, that's all we have today. Wow, what a great reading today, and a wonderful reminder that there is hope in this program of action. And I will leave you with one last thing before we sign off today. And this is from a website called silkworth.net. It talks about Bill W.'s dinner with his friend, the notorious dinner that we just read about that made such an impact on Bill. So I'll just read this one paragraph and we'll call it done. Bill was deeply impressed by Ebby's words, but was even more affected by Ebby's example of action. Here was someone who drank like Bill drank, and yet Ebby was sober, due to a simple religious idea and a practical program of action. The results were an inexplicably different person, fresh-skinned, glowing face with a different look in his eyes. A miracle sat directly across the kitchen table from Bill. Ebby was not some do-gooder who had read something in a book. Here was a hopeless alcoholic who had been completely defeated by John Barleycorn and yet had, in effect, been raised from the dead. It was a message of hope for an alcoholic, that God would do for us what we could not do for ourselves. Remember, Bill W. bristled at the idea of God, but then Ebby said something pretty profound. Why don't you focus on your own conception of God? Start with that. And buddy, that seemed to kind of open the door for Bill. Thank you so much for joining me in this lifeboat of recovery. We'll see you back here tomorrow.